All right, well, welcome everybody to Clothes Makes the Bean. I'm going to read the panel description to everyone so you know you're in the right place, and then we'll just each introduce ourselves, I think is the easiest way to start, and maybe talk a little, just tell us a little bit, each panelist tell everybody a little bit about your background, and particularly when it comes to clothing and that kind of thing. And then what interested you about being on this panel? We'll kind of start with that. So let's talk about what a character's costume tells us about the character. Like how a collar high enough to cut off your peripheral vision usually means you're a bad guy. And the classic, of course, good guy has the white hat trope. So should we start at the end, or would you like me to start introductions, or do you want to start down at the very end?
Hello, I'm Ansel, they, he. So I have, my degree is in film. I don't use it, but I have a lot of opinions. And then I worked for a while in the yarn industry, but I'm still quite connected with a lot of the folks that I met through doing like yarn trade shows and stuff. So I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on things like where textiles come from. And then I'm a cosplayer, so I'm always looking at, if I'm watching something, if it's something I want to learn.
Hi, I'm Charlene. My pronouns are Faye, Femme, Fair. I am an assistant stage manager, production assistant for live theater. I have been coming here for at least 10, 11 years. And I was most recently a blog writer for Minnesota Fashion Week. And this panel interested me because it's kind of an intersection of all of those.
I'm Samantha Rei, and if you're going to any of my panels, I'm sorry you have to keep hearing this over and over again. I'm a fashion designer. I've been in the industry for 23 years. I got my start in J Fashion. I was one of the first Lolita designers in the United States. I have a book on how to design steampunk and cosplay fashion, and I was on that show about fashion.
I'm Danith McPherson, and I'm a writer. These are my books, and I always pay attention to how I dress my characters. And I've done costuming, and I am a kilt maker.
And my name is Baird. I have been costuming since 1986, so yeah, I'm that old. And I have published some fantasy novels back in 2008. I ran the costume shop out at the Renaissance Festival for several years, and my background in terms of, intellectually speaking, is art history and art, studio art, and then also a minor in anthropology. So I've always been kind of a big studier of myth and fashion and art, and like you said, Charlene, this is such an intersection of all these things that I said I kind of feel like I really want to talk about this and learn more about it from everyone else. So we'll go ahead and just start with, do we want to just start with kind of the most common tropes that we see? Or do we want to go down another path about how these reflect the characters themselves? Which way do we want to go first? Maybe kind of talk about some of the reflect the character. All right, so let's talk about that. So costumes reflecting our characters. How do they reflect the characters themselves? How do they reflect their story arc and maybe even their evolution as a character? Would anybody like to kind of get the ball rolling on that? I can jump in. All right, I'll get the ball rolling. And also, I should note also that I'm good with taking questions and comments from the audience. If you raise your hand, I'll make eye contact with you so that you know I saw you, and then you don't have to keep your hand up. So I'll just kind of keep track of people as they raise their hands. So I was thinking to myself that when I first thought about this and characters and their costumes, of course, as I'm wearing my 10th Doctor, Mrs. Maisel mashup, I'm thinking about, it seems like characters have, there's always that one icon that characters have to have, right? And when I was writing in my book, I had to create I wanted to pick an outfit that if something ever happened, my book ever got optioned, because small press books always get optioned. What kind of piece of clothing could I put on her that would be her? And so I always think about that, like with the Doctor Who, when I start studying, I love doing mashups. I think about, there's iconography involved that, you have to be able to recognize that character immediately. So I just kind of was thinking about that and color schemes. So we think about like, Superman has his S, that kind of thing. So when you're planning costumes or you're writing with characters, do you think about that at all? What kind of things do you think about? How do you want to define your characters?
I'm building worlds, so I have different cultures, and so I have to think about what fits in with that culture. And then after that, then what you're talking about, then how does a particular character dress within that culture? Do they conform with the standards of dress, or do they have some idiosyncrasy? I've got one character that she just loves to wear vibrant colors, even though that isn't necessarily the norm, and she's always kind of shocking people with what she wears. So it gives you, it almost gives you kind of a shorthand then later on, and when you're talking about that character, it's like, okay, now this character comes in and is wearing this vivid color, and your reader immediately sees the whole personality that comes with the clothing.
I like when people know the trope and then kind of turn it on its head a little bit. I love like when you see kind of a stodgy lady in like a well-fitted kind of like high collar, really tight, like the nurse who is then Mombi in Return to Oz, is that really tight, and we got the same thing in that weird Cinderella with the stepmother and the stepsisters. But then you've got that kind of turned on its head in The Witcher with the headmistress mage lady, and she looks like she's going to be a bad guy, but she isn't, and she's dressed in that kind of like tight look. But also using something that would be a signifier for like goodness and sweetness, like in Lovecraft Country, when Gia, who is supposed to be coded as a monster, is obsessed with Judy Garland. And so everything she wears is very sweet, and the only times you see her kind of letting her monster out is when the colors shift. But for the most part, she is trying to perform human, and when she's performing human, she wears very like sweet, innocent looks, and I love that.
Well, I myself don't often make characters unless they're for D&D. But the thing that came to mind was that somebody asked me about a character that I wanted to make because there's a new class that somebody wrote for like a buttoned-up barbarian. And the first thing that I wanted was to make it Nyapokra, a bird person. And then I was thinking about, like, somebody asked me about them and I had no idea, but then I was just like, okay, what if this person, who is very buttoned up and a barbarian, is also super stressed out? So like their feathers would start to fall out. So they would have like a mohawk, but they would keep their feathers, so they would have them sewn into their lapel because they are still very fashionable. Like it's little details like that where like, you can take pieces that you know about the character and just weave them into the rest of it for flavor.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I really like to think about costuming as like, this is a tool to communicate with your audience. So there are ways that you can very easily shorthand something about a character.
We have an extra.
Okay.
You're sharing over there.
Sorry. Yeah, and then, like you said, Samantha, I love seeing kind of things turned on their head, especially when it comes to things like color language. One of my favorite examples is the Luke Skywalker journey from white into black, because I think we often see dark colors as like kind of villainous and white as like purity, and that's one that I really love to see turned on its head, because it's like, well, why? And a lot of it is like human culture, contemporary Western culture ingrained in. So things like showing the arc of like, what are they wearing? What is that communicating to the audience? Or is it turning an expectation around as you're watching it? I think is really cool. And like, yeah, just what are they wearing for what they're doing is another thing. Like I kind of love the symbolism, and then on the other hand, the practicality of like, who sewed that for you?
So I do want to say too, to add on to your color thing, specifically about Star Wars, because Star Wars is so heavily inspired by Japanese aesthetic and history and whatever. The black-white symbolism is different.
Yeah.
So I remember, this is so like hoity-toity, but when I went to Perpich 1,000 years ago, I took a foreign film analysis and criticism class. And I remember we watched Dreams by Akira Kurosawa, and my teacher was just like, it's different there, and that's why the cowboys are wearing swapped colored hats. In the West, you would see white hat good, black hat bad, but in Japan it's swapped. And that is why Luke is like, oh, it's black, oh, he's bad, he's getting like Darth Vader. And it's like, oh, well, he's still good, even though he's wearing black.
Yeah. It's like the black almost indicates mastery at that point, that
Yeah.
you're more serious with the darker
It's
color.
tricking the audience because of what they know, just in a Western mindset.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, well, what if I think about the rest of the world, just like in Star Wars, the rest of the galaxy?
Oh yeah, think about white belt, black belt. Which one's the higher belt? Yeah. Well, and when you think about in Western culture, if you notice in a lot of, especially period movies, the protagonist, when it's a female presenting protagonist, she's always wearing very light colors and her hair is down. This is shorthand for she is young and innocent. And then as she gets married, her wardrobe usually gets tighter and more buttoned down and darker. And yeah, as she's becoming respectable and that kind of thing.
And if evil, then sexy.
Then she becomes a Halloween costume.
Yes, I do get upset by the way the male will be dressed in a very utilitarian way,
Yes.
in a very practical way. I recently the new Dune that came out. They land on a desert planet, and the men are all in the heavy suits and they're all covered up. And what is Jessica wearing? They're wearing this big floaty, all these floaty things, and it's like they are going to be sunburned in 2 seconds. And I see that happen a lot, and that really bothers me because that just wouldn't be the. You in that kind of a setting, that kind of an environment and climate, and you have to dress them for the climate too. You would be wearing something that would be protective.
So I'm going to ask you, and then we're going to go back to
Sorry, just a Dune aficionado. So could that disparity in costuming be in fact an indication because they're coming from a planet with a completely different climate? So it's a poor choice for the climate they're on
Because they're idiots.
because they are. Yes.
Except that the males still are dressed rather protectively.
Right, but that's a uniform.
But
It's a military
that's a
uniform.
good point, and that would be a very good way to use that.
I don't know if that was the intent. I was just,
Yeah.
There was the concept art of the still suit, like way before they started designing the costumes, and it was just front and center, a butt. Really tight in there, and I was just like, what is this? My husband and my friend who are obsessed with Dune are like, if the men wear exactly the same kind of suit, then this is actually right. And I was like, okay. So it has to be as tight as possible because still suit. And I was like, all right. Yeah, if we see these on the men, good job.
And just a comment, they do mention there are actually internal and external commentaries between characters talking about the fact that they know that they're inappropriately dressed. And that they really are like trying to figure it out.
So they're kind of lampshaded a little bit. Actually show it off a little bit. No, you see like, colonization, showed, you see like in India, the British colonizers show up and they're all wearing, their summer gear is to say tight-fitting linen instead of a tight-fitting wool. That kind of thing. So let's unpack this a little bit. So inappropriate dress. For, does anybody have opinions on the dichotomy that we see in the femme presenting dress and the masculine presenting dress?
I mean, yeah, we see just in like film in general, there is a lot of the thought process that goes into the just kind of problems with like industry is there is a lot of, the thought process into the men's clothes is like, what is this going to say about the character, and is this useful? And then the thought process of a lot of women's clothes is it hot? Which, like, listen, I'm bi, I love to see hot people, but there is the double standard that often comes up when you're looking at stuff and should not be ignored.
Yeah. I think superhero movies are the low-hanging fruit of that divide, because like men get to wear things that they can move in, and women for the most part are wearing things where I wonder how are they moving. And I could see the like, for me and how I feel in clothes, that I can't imagine how that's not chafing. Do you not have a wedgie? How are you able to run in, like, I'm amazed by how strong your calves must be, because those heels are high. That's insane. Like, I don't understand how you're doing this for literal hours. When have you last taken a shower? In what way does that breathe? I don't understand what you're going through. And for most of the female characters before we had before we were done with the Infinity Saga, were human. So it's just like, okay, so you don't have super sweat. You're not like, so like, what's going on with your body?
So I've been a comic fan since I was pretty little. I'm like early middle school. And so watching kind of the evolution of superhero costumes in movies to like kind of what they are right now, and they like make more sense now in movies than they did in comic books. And they actually like explain them a little bit. And even watching the evolution of Black Widow then to Black Widow like now, and she was trained to be a honeypot. So it makes sense for her to be sexy, but she changed from being sexy for the audience to being sexy for the movie. Like being sexy as the character. Yeah, and I feel like there was a wall kind of put up for her once Scarlett Johansson was able to be like, I have like a little bit more say in what I wear. And same with Scarlet Witch, like Elizabeth Olsen was just like, no, I hate this costume, please don't show my boobs, I don't want to do this. And I feel like her costume is a million times better than in the comic because she had say, and it was like, if I was a hero and I had to like look ostentatious in a way, what if I did this and was still sexy, but did these things instead? Because if I was a hero, this is what I would wear. And I think having that input is really good. They did a great job of bringing over Ms. Marvel. Like my very favorite thing, I was like, please include this scene. And they didn't, and I was like, all right, well, it was still one of my favorite scenes. When that comic first came out, she's like, Mom, where's my burkini? And she's like, well, first of all, you're grounded. You can't have it, you're not going outside. Second of all, what, that thing you refuse to wear in public? No, you can't have it. And so she had to like sneak out her burkini, and that's what she turned into her costume in the comic books. Because she was just like, I want to have some sort of like part of my heritage, but also like running around like Ms. Marvel is hard because the shoes are terrible and I'm getting a wedgie and my boobs are flopping around. So hers was practical, and then they brought over the practicality in the show, but like they truncated it a little bit and it made more sense. But I love that she was just like, oh my God, this is so hard, I can't do this. This is stupid, why am I doing this? And then lastly, in The Boys with Starlight, when she's just like, this is a costume I created myself, and they're like, it's not good enough, you need to be sexier. And the fact that that was a couple episodes arc of her fighting with the corporation, being like, I don't want to wear this, and they're like, you have to because you're owned by us now. And then her kind of like fighting back a little bit, and so there was a sort of happy medium until she reverted back to, I'm not doing this. I'm doing what I want to do because I'm the one fighting crime.
I love that. And the costuming becomes part of the story arc, it becomes the character itself. And you know, your point about Scarlet Witch in particular, she was still very much telegraphed as that character. I mean, nobody mistook who she was, right? In the Infinity War saga, and people saw her and they read that one icon piece, and they don't have to have her in that terrible bikini 70s thing.
But then they made a joke about it in WandaVision, which was so funny.
That is right. I haven't seen WandaVision yet.
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect.
I love that.
And it plays with the costume tropes too, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. No, which I think is fantastic. Well, and you're talking about the culture too. So, and I think one of the themes when we were conversing about this on email is culture and how does that affect costuming. So let's talk about that a little bit. Culture as what are the practicalities? You mentioned, where do you source your materials? And a couple of you had mentioned that say, okay, what does the culture say about the costume and how can that be brought into a story? Either as a creator, as a fan of a movie, as a cosplayer. What are those little details that we think are interesting on that kind of thing?
What do you look at when you're trying to create that kind of thing for a story?
Yeah, well, because I am building the culture myself, I have to think about what logically they would be wearing, what kind of materials they would have available to them, and what they do. So like in this one, it's a culture that it's clan-based, so the clans all identify themselves by armbands. If you don't have an armband, it means that you are a criminal because you've been kicked out of your clan. So that's very important. They also carry weapons all the time, but you're not supposed to in polite events, in big gatherings, and so they have ways to conceal them in their clothing. And everyone just kind of turns a blind eye to concealed weapons. As long as you don't have your knife right out in front, they're okay with it. But everyone knows that everyone is carrying something. So I have to think about then, okay, then what kind of a sleeve do you need if you have a knife on your wrist? And what kind of a sleeve do you need if you're going to have to swing a weapon? What kind of a boot do you wear if you're going to have to run? That kind of thing.
Are these done in like a tactical, like uniform way, or are they doing like a fashion tricky way?
No, this is their fashion tricky way.
Neat. I like that. That's cool.
They wear high collars because that's a vulnerable spot, and they have throwing weapons that are very good at puncturing. So,
one of my favorite scenes in John Carpenter's Vampires, the one with one of the older brothers, I don't remember which one. The campiest movie ever, but this group of people who are fighting vampires, as they're getting ready to go, they all put on chainmail neck guards.
That's cool.
And their equipment up, yeah, their whole suiting up scene.
I
It's just
love
like
a suiting up
coolest
scene.
thing. Yeah,
Because it shows that the costume is actually a functional piece. Like in
Yes.
Rings of Power, when they show them taking off and putting on the armor,
Yes,
they actually put the thought into, no, this is a functioning piece, not just it's pretty on screen.
exactly.
So good.
I love in Lord of the Rings where mithril is nice and lightweight, because if anybody who follows history knows that actually they talk about how plate armor is so much heavier and stuff. Actually, plate armor was easier to move in than chainmail because it weighed less, it required less layers, and chainmail was super, super heavy. So like in Lord of the Rings, they're like, well, chainmail doesn't have to be heavy because it's magic. So I kind of like that as being part of the scene too. And which makes me think about, Samantha, you were talking about Industrial Revolution. So the difference between what would you see prior to Industrial Revolution and what would the Industrial Revolution do to change?
Well, and that's the thing too,
How
in my
people
very
work.
boring, very long, early video when I first started doing stuff, was there's been more than just the one Industrial Revolution that we know about. There's been at least two before that. It's just what is the technology and how is it different? So you got to think about like a Renaissance Industrial Revolution versus a 1900s Industrial Revolution, and how fully different those things are. What is that going to result in your costume building?
Back to the original question, that like, I recently saw The Blackening, and it's so funny. But the costumes for the characters, like, it's so easy to identify exactly who they are within our culture based on what they're wearing. Like, I know exactly who's the bougie one, who's the responsible one, who's the F-boy, who's
the gay one?
Yeah.
I'm gay, I can't die.
And like, and when I first saw the poster, it communicated so well everything about them before I actually got to see the movie. Because I was like, oh, is this Clue? Are we watching Clue, actually? And I noticed, like, okay, so they're all holding the right props, the weapons are all grayed out like Clue pieces, they're all colored like Clue characters, and I'm like, oh, we're playing Clue, absolutely. Absolutely, I know exactly what's gonna happen, let's go. And I was just able to hop in and enjoy the fun of the movie because I was like, I know this. I've been here.
It's hilarious.
It's so funny.
Something I like about costuming that we don't get really in our everyday wear is that costumes tend to be all the way around 360 degrees. Interesting things, you know, on the back so they look real good on screen from the back as well as from the front. We don't really do that in everyday life. We usually, you know, all the things be like right up front. And I love that with costuming, that you get something more interesting in all views of what the person is wearing.
And that's why The Witcher sucks. In my video, that they didn't even try to match the patterns, and I talk about it for like 5 solid minutes.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yennefer's outfits are the worst. They don't even match the patterns. They didn't even try.
It's laser cut, you can see through it, just go like this.
Yeah. I really think, like, kind of on a, how to make a transitional sentence, sorry.
Go right ahead.
The way in which we have, like, the clothing has like 2 layers of projecting information because you have the character, like within the fiction, the character projecting information to the other people in the story. And then you have the outside layer of like, what is that projection to the audience? Because you've got things where like, so a few years ago, I really fell down the hole of like historical fashion stuff. My beloved. And a thing that really will make or break like a historical show is not necessarily like how accurate it is, because like there's no such thing as like true accuracy. But you have, okay, when someone sees that, what are they going to see, and like their expectation versus like what are other characters going to see, and like making the decision on that. So a favorite of mine right now is Our Flag Means Death, which has a lot of anachronisms. But also they got some things really right. I will recommend your video
Our
of
Flag
that.
Means
It's
Death.
fantastic.
I have a video, you should watch it.
It's fantastic. About the like, they got the like the sail thimble thing. I'm forgetting what it's called, right? But then like Steve's outfit is like later 18th century.
But also, like a lot of the, Italy is not 16. Like they just, it's the David Jenkins school of what if history, but make it fan fiction.
Yeah, exactly.
I see a lot of that lately.
And the way that
Know
it's
the
like,
rules so you can break them.
Exactly.
I have done the research and I have made a calculated decision based on what I want the audience to get from this, especially if you have limited time to convey information. If you are a half-hour company, you do not have a lot of time to say, like, to talk about where this came from or why are they wearing that. You have the shorthand.
You don't have time to do the full dressing scene in a half-hour comedy. Or do the whole comedy.
Well, the whole dressing thing, that's very much too, shows a status, because there's a difference between clothing that you can put on yourself and clothing that you need help to put on. And if you need help to put on, then you have a higher status, probably. You probably can hire someone to help you get dressed. So, you know, when you have things like corsets, and there are ways to put on corsets yourself, but it's a whole lot better if you have someone else who can put you into the corset. And that shows a status.
Oh, I was gonna say, so how many people here, show of hands, ever follow Frock Flicks? Oh my gosh, not enough people follow Frock Flicks. So Frock Flicks is a group of costume and historical clothing experts that watch movies and snark about them. And in some cases they're kind about it, in some cases during Snark Week is the best week ever in January. And yeah, they'll point out that fine line between, this was a purposeful riff on, like I think Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte, I consider that a purposeful riff on the clothing of that period to indicate the characters versus, you know, we're just lazy and we put zippers on all of our costumes. So, yeah. I said Samantha's opinions about that.
I hate lazy closures.
Right.
So I do want to talk, so I'm working on this, it's my baby. It's a long project that I've been working on since like a year ago, and it's a 5-part series of the magicians and what their costumes say about their mental health. Look, I'm gonna be so annoying when this comes out. I'm so sorry. My producer's been editing the first 2 videos. I had to read, sorry. I ended up like really sick last year and in the hospital, and I ended up re-recording stuff because I looked so different afterwards that I was like, I don't want to look like this in the videos. So it's taking forever. But the first one is just like the world building of the magicians and how they did a lot of the like culture building through the costumes, and how Magali did such a good job of just like making it fantasy, but what if so many people from so many worlds were going through your magical world like a gateway that they picked up on stuff. So nothing just looks like fantasy, Renaissance Festival, Lord of the Rings. It all looks so weird because it's had so many references from different worlds. Awesome. The second one is going to be about Quentin and Julia, and hold on, I've got very clever names for them. Trauma and the need to be exceptional, and it talks about the fact that they have these expectations for themselves and they both end up very, very depressed, and Quentin's entire look is just sad boy, like sad, comfortable boy. I'm always depressed, lots of soft things, lots of like cool colors that are really safe. And then Julia has a ton of different arcs depending on where she is in her healing journey. The third one is a study in growth, and so that's going to be about how Elliot and Margot are the parents. Like, they are the most frivolous party kids, but their clothes show how they've matured by the end of it. And then also Elliot dealing with his trauma and like being adult about it. Internal circumstances, the stages of grief, but make it sexy. And that's about Penny and Alice and how they are always dressed for the audience to find them attractive. And how that kind of gets reined in a little bit as they grow and deal with their grief. And then last but not least, All Good Things, which is about the ones who are dealing with addiction and how their clothing changes as they're kind of getting clean from their addictions, whether it's alcohol or drugs or magic or crime. But these are these things where if you get to know the characters, you can see the shorthand by what they're wearing, and I think that's really clever when people do that. And sidebar, I had finally gotten up the nerve to email Magali, and I found out that she had died 6 days before I tried to email her, and it was nowhere. The only way I found out was because the showrunner of The Magicians made a tweet about it. Wow. So that is a huge loss, because if you reach out to costume designers, they'll usually talk to you if they want you to do a good job. Our Flag Means Death, the costume department will answer all your questions because they want to see the costumes. They are the reason why there's so many pink robes, is because they're like, oh, you like them? Here, have all of our notes and measurements. Here, have the place where we got the fabric. So be brave.
Well, I love the sharing in the costume community like that. That's kind of a side note on me. Never be afraid to ask questions of costumers.
I'd love to see other people making cool stuff.
Exactly. The more of us there are, the better. We'll take over the world. Well, and do we have a hand up?
Oh, there it is. Sorry. There was actually a tangent of your hand in the door in exactly the wrong spot. So yes.
Has anybody on the panel or in the room seen The English?
What is
Which
it?
was a
The
Netflix.
English.
It was a Netflix series. It's got Emily Blunt in it, and
I have not seen it yet,
blast,
but
I
it's
forgot.
on my
But it's
watch
set
list.
in the American West, and in it a well-off, sheltered English woman comes to the American West in search of the man who done her wrong.
Oh. Sure.
And I tell you this, but I can immediately say it's not that story.
Okay,
She thinks that's the story.
that's
she
the
started off
launch pad.
But
Yeah.
the costuming is so, it tells so much story
All right,
about
panel
who
over,
she
we're
is.
just looking at costumes now.
So these costumes actually kind of remind me of Brotherhood of the Wolf a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay, I can see that. But she starts off, the person she starts off is obviously not the person she ends up as, but her clothes tell that story
Sure.
of her transformation. It's really one of the best jobs I've seen in TV and movies.
Does she wear
Of
those
doing-
pants the whole time, or does she like work up to pants?
She works up to pants.
Cool.
And they're actually,
The English.
they're also,
Yep, Netflix.
they're very good about using narrative, discussing the costumes in the course of the narrative. I mean, it's not distracting. It's that, oh, all right, you're going to have to wear something other than that.
Sure.
And there are practical reasons why these things happen, not just, oh, okay, we're going to change your costume. Because one of the things they recognize is luggage. What luggage?
Yep.
There's likewise a costume arc with the main male character. I wish I could remember the actor's name. He's wonderful. He is a Crow, I think, scout for the U.S. Army, who retires, and he is more or less himself as you go through the movie, based on parts of his uniform, parts of his ceremonial gear. It's a really great way to characterize these people and their changes, and in some cases it's right out front, in which somebody says, "What's that?" And the character tells them. So I recommend it very much for characters showing off costume.
So it shows their emotional growth and their practical growth as they have to adapt to their new environment, which is a good balance. That's good. So, but I'm gonna, real quick, does anybody want to dovetail into that at all a little bit? I saw some kind of motion over this way. All right. Well,
You mentioned luggage. One of the things is, how do people carry things? You know, what do they have for pockets or bags? Women's clothes never have the right kind of pockets. And so as a sewer, I'm so glad that I can put decent pockets into things. But what does a character need to have with them in that society, and how do they carry it?
love your dress. Thanks. It has pockets. So we'll do a comment from right here in the front, and then behind. We'll go to you next. Yes.
Well, I was just thinking of another show. If you've seen Hotel Del Luna on Netflix, it's a South Korean show, and it's basically this young woman who commits a crime many years ago, and she ends up being the mistress of a hotel for the dead. And her costuming is amazing. And she wears these like long flowing dresses, and she sometimes does some super kick-ass stuff, but she can dress like that because she has servants. But I don't think she ever wears the same costume twice, and her dresses are like amazing. And she's very gorgeous anyway, and the other costuming is a little more buttoned down. It is set in Seoul. But it's the cinematography helps, but the costumes are amazing.
There's that thing too of, is it costumes versus is it a wardrobe? And one of the things that I love is, the idea of a never-ending wardrobe, but it's never explained.
Yeah.
And the only time I've ever seen it explained is in the last season of Mrs. Maisel. When they're like showing all of her clothes, and she's like, "Oh yeah, no, these are all my clothes." And it's like, no, that's a really long hallway.
They really the clothes were just as much the characters of that show.
Absolutely, and I love that they just like explained it, even though it's this kind of like magical realism without magic kind
Exactly.
of world. It's a living like Broadway play.
Yes.
So it's cute.
So I'm gonna go to you, and then I'll go to you after that.
I was just curious if you can think of an example or just want to talk about the difference between when you can tell a designer has said, I want this aesthetic, therefore I will invent an in-universe reason for it to exist, versus I have thought about my universe and therefore they dress like this. And how that feels different. And frequently you see it as people forcing sexy to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that.
You know.
Power girl? I mean, everyone's like, oh, she's got a boob window, but the boob window is supposed to show that she doesn't have a planet or a home, and so she doesn't have an S. But we get to see her tits.
Which one was that?
Power girl.
Oh,
Power girl, yeah. I don't have a symbol, but I have boobs.
I was thinking about like various Star Trek parodies versus the Orville.
Yes.
Like when you look at other Star Trek parodies, they're like, oh, I'm gonna take this iconography, I'm gonna take the stuff that we know about Star Trek that people can very easily see and translate, and then be like, I'm just gonna slap that on there and I'm gonna go about my business. Whereas I think the Orville starts off being like, here are the people that I think you're going to just know, like here's your Worf, here's your Data, here's your this, your that, your whatever. But I think what's clever and different is that the Worf analog is not exactly like, and he's not like a parody of or a satire of, but he's like his own thing, which is kind of, it takes the masculinity that we can expect, and it takes the femininity that if you know about Klingons a bunch that you would expect, and then kind of does those things a lot differently. And with the Data analog, that he actually just doesn't have a face at all, and he takes away a lot more humanity from that character and relates to you almost instantly. He's not going to be a character that has empathy for you, or you should really have empathy for him starting out.
That's really cool.
I know. I really like the Orville.
So I'm gonna go over here to your.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up, because we've been talking a lot about how costuming can speak to character journey, but I've been thinking a lot about how different costumes a character wears signify different parts of their life or their personality, etc. So like the difference between at home, at work, and my brain keeps going, and superhero, but like, you know, it's not just that. Miss Maisel is a good example because, you know, when she's at home, when she's a housewife versus when she's on the stage as a comic are iterations but different looks.
Yeah.
I'd just be interested on people's.
To continue on the point about costuming, creating the universe and then to create costuming. Two movies come to mind for me as examples: Black Panther and Wakanda Forever. And I admire the costume designer for those films because she saw the vision not only from the comic books, but she saw how the vision and the costuming told the story of Wakanda. And the various costuming showed the various classes of people, from the warriors to the royals, and I mean, Angela Bassett rocked.
Yeah.
I mean, her costuming and her hats, her headpieces reflected that authority.
Yeah.
All of her hats were 3D printed.
So.
So cool.
That's what came to mind when you made that point about the universe and costuming and the costuming and creating the universe.
There was a retrospective of all of her costumes in Seattle, and I missed it by a week. But one of the cool things I love about just the creation of the world through those costumes specifically is, like, I was complaining yesterday about how, oh, well, it's exotic to me, so I'll just keep it as the race it is. And this was done differently because it was for Black people, by Black people. And so they're like, okay, so what if we made it a melting pot? the way like New York is legitimately a melting pot. We've got all these cultures that have kind of smushed together, and they all kind of make sense because everybody has touched everything, and so it makes sense that all of these countries and all of these cultures in the middle of Africa, a continent, not a country, are like all of these different things. And so if you have a chance to watch any of the videos interviewing literally anybody on that crew, but especially her, watch them, because they do the breakdown of all of the research and all of the different like cities and tribes and whatever, the different like older traditions and newer traditions that were tapped into, and the fact that everything, unlike all the other superhero stuff where it's like, well, this was molded, this is PVC, this is whatever, latex or scuba, everything was leather, or actually beaded, or actually painted, or actually wood, and they hired all of these cultural artisans from all of the different countries and cultures to make the things, which is so cool.
And you can really see the difference.
Yeah.
You can see the difference.
Oh my god. Like, especially the beadwork. So cool.
I love it when artists like that have the budget to do that too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And like, so what's cool too is, not this, I'm sorry, like tangent, boring, whatever. One of the things I love is the respect that costume designers are finally getting from the audience and from their production companies. I don't know if any of you have watched Wheel of Time. It's one of my favorites. I think they did a really great job of building the world. But they actually did like a mini series of videos where they interviewed like the whole costuming department, not just the main costume designer. So they talked about the fact that they wanted to portray these stories about the characters without you having to like have exposition at you. So like we've got Girl, and she's from River Place, so what if blue and also river things in costume? So the leather worker talked about all the iterations of the things that he did, like all the samples, and what he decided to do. And her belt, they actually like etched a river onto the belt, so you could show like what side of the river she lived on or whatever. And it's just these little details that if you didn't know to look for them, you wouldn't do it. But knowing that they're there makes you want to pay attention and kind of like decipher what's going on in the costumes. But they actually talked to the whole, I think it was maybe 3 episodes where they talked to everybody. It's awesome.
I think every show and movie that does heavy costuming should have you get the making of. I think there should be the costuming of the movies, because that would be fantastic.
I think one of the first ones to do that was Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's the reason I went to film school was their appendices. That's amazing. And one of the things on kind of a similar trend that I loved is they had a very extended costuming section in each of their appendices, and the things they hid because they're union and they loved what they were doing so much. So like Theoden's armor has like a hidden crest on the inside. You never see it on the film, but it's just the thing that like the costume designer loved it, and it was a thing that the actor, as he's like putting it on, they're helping him put it on, he sees and gets to just really feel it, like, or the way that they it's never seen on screen him doing anything with it, but Aragorn's sleeves are detachable with like a piece of leather, because they're like, oh, he's a ranger. He's quickly, if he has to quickly do something, they hit a knife on a belt. That's like, oh yeah, if he's like cleaning a fish. You know, it's not a sword, it's just a little utility knife. And those details, I love them so much.
Well, they're back to Wheel of Time. They talked to, I can't remember his name, Moraine's Watcher guy, because they cast a Korean man in the role. They asked him, what would you want to wear? And he's like, I would like to put some of my like heritage into my costume. And so they designed the costume together, which is so cool. And then my beloved, the 100, Clark's gun. Clark's gun has tallies of everybody she killed.
Oh, I know.
And the only reason you know that is because one picture was released by the costume.
So it must be a pretty big gun.
She's just got dainty second grade teacher tallies.
There you go. So back there.
So I actually wanted to talk about, I was actually talking about what Ansel was talking about. I actually got to see the Lord of the Rings exhibit. And they had the costumes there, and oh my God. But Theoden's tunic is basically doublet. They lined it entirely in silk gold lame. gorgeous, and they did some stunning embroidery on the inside. And there was this wonderful video of him saying, I can't believe you did this for me. And they said to him, we want you to feel like a king.
Oh.
Right?
That's so good.
I know, so like that level of detail. Like, no one ever saw that. No one ever, it was like literally one of those little secret things that the costume department did to make this actor feel more king. How cool is that?
That is so cool. We had in the back, yes.
I know that we've talked a lot about like live action shows and comic books, but I think one aspect of media that hasn't been really mentioned would be like anime and manga. The one that really comes to mind for me when it comes to costuming is Demon Slayer, and specifically with Tanjiro, the main character. Because at the very beginning, he's wearing just his normal Aori coat. But it changes throughout the series. Like when he's training, he's got that special blue version, which, if I remember right, was a gift from some of his predecessors that were training under Master that he's training under. But as he grows and tries to protect his sister Nezuko, his uniform changes, showing his maturity throughout his journey.
So we get that evolution. I'm not as familiar with anime, but I believe there's a lot of symbolism involved in anime renderings, isn't there?
I think, yeah, like I think I'm not as familiar with like more modern anime because I don't have time a lot of the time, but I think animation is a really interesting one. Like anime and any other animation is an interesting one to look at because you have to do it in much more shorthand because you can't put that level of detail, especially budgets and crunch times for animators is insane. So you have to be really clever about how you do it. I think anime in particular, you're going to see a lot of those cultural specific.
I'm a fan of anime hair because you can't. It's hard to do that in real life. And it's kind of goes. I love it. I'm a Black Butler fan and Death Note. Black Butler was my gateway anime, and Death Note has some really nice plays in it. There is an anime of the Count of Monte Cristo. Which is fabulous because of how they use patterns in it. It's a very unusual approach to things.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that other people have seen it because I'll say that to people and go, oh, I don't know, I never heard that. And I think it's absolutely beautiful.
My gateway was Sailor Moon. So Magical Girl anime always has a place in my heart. So I love that Madoka Magica really kind of deals with the fact that, you know, your magic chooses your costume. They did the same thing, I think, in Prisma Ilia. But they do it a lot in like kind of these girl magic based RPGs. Like I'm obsessed with the Atelier series. I love those games and I have so many of them. But I love that part of their character is the fact that they have to have an alchemist costume, and the alchemist costume looks fully different from everything else in the world, and they all just kind of look like magical girl costumes a la Madoka Magica, where it's just, I mean, this came first, but like big frilly dresses and like huge staffs that are really, really girly and super cute, and everyone's like, I trust that person, that is an alchemist. And it's like, yeah, no questions asked.
Yeah, I think the only type of anime that I engage my brain in when it comes to costuming is magical girl anime. And like you could say a lot about the 90s Sailor Moon, but like the casual outfits that they wore, so good. So emblematic of who their characters are without leaning into like the Power Rangers trope of like, this is the red character, they wear red in real life, even though that doesn't truly make sense for them to wear red all of the time, even though they're the Red Power Ranger. But they get to, and also that they're fashion icons in the real world. Like their clothes were so good that they themselves are fashion icons for us. And it helped like me understand, like it's a good starting spot for me to be like, okay, I'm seeing this magical girl anime. I know this color is this person, this color is this kind of person, this color is this kind of person.
Blue is quiet, green is tall.
Purple is suspicious. Suspicious or sad. And sometimes both.
Dark blue is gay.
So and like and it still really worked very well in Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant. And I really love their dueling outfits to like change the silhouette from being like, we're kind of doing the same color scheme, or we're not doing the same silhouette. I love the costumes in that show.
It's really fun to follow the lineage of that too, as I'm a Ryoko Ikena fan, so like Rose of Versailles from the 70s, and like the line you can see of like where the frilly stuff comes from, and it's so much fun. A lot of it doesn't make sense, but I don't care.
Well, with Sailor Moon too, Naoko was such a huge fashion fan that like each said she was kind of assigned a designer, and each one of their street clothes was kind of inspired by a specific designer, especially in their pinup art. And like by pinup, I mean literally just like not like sexy on the side of a plane, but just like their pictures that she would illustrate of them wearing pretty things. So there were these really iconic early illustrations of all of them wearing these like gowns that were their like princess looks, and they were each like there was a Dior, there was a Galliano, or not Galliano, there was a Gautier. But they were all inspired by these different designers, and you can find the pictures that they were inspired by because she was so into fashion. It was really cool.
That is so cool. Well, I'm kind of with you, and I'm going to call on you again when you mentioned the day wear versus the uniform. And did you have another comment on that too, or?
Sort of related. Speaking about anime, made me think about cartoons and how like a lot of cartoons, it's like this is the one outfit they wear, and then every so often it's like they'll lampshade it by, or they'll hang a lantern on it by showing the character's closet, and it's just 20 versions of the same exact outfit.
Yeah. The Mickey Mouse closet.
Yeah. And then Totally Spies also ties into the, you know, day-to-day wear versus uniform, is they wear the same bodysuits on missions every mission, but then when they're in high school every day, they have a different outfit.
Yeah, they don't just wear all red or whatnot.
Yeah.
Right, so we have just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to let Kathy comment, and then we're going to comment over here, and I don't think we can take any more comments at this point.
I was just saying, okay, I'll be real quick. In 2017, my husband and I were in Colorado, and at the Denver Art Museum, they had the display of every single costume from the Star Wars films,
Yes.
starting from New Hope to The Last Jedi.
Yep.
What struck me was the costuming for Queen Amidala.
Oh, Trisha Baker!
Grew from Elizabethan England and the Japanese, and many of the gowns, I mean, the fabric manipulation, the textures of the silk, I mean, it was absolutely mind-blowing. And then in the Clone Wars, or the wedding dress that Padme Amidala wears is from a 1930s French Alençon lace.
Sure.
That is irreplaceable, and it was, I mean, it was simple, but it was stunning.
That gray outfit she wears in the first movie with the pearls,
Yes,
that was from the front of the 1920s dress. I still have that Vogue article from when I was in because I did 2 essays for school.
No, I was just gonna say 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. You're telling me that it was time. All right.
Yes.
So at this point, we're going to wrap things up. So does anybody have any last comments burning in on your tongue that you need to get out to share with the world before we close things down?
Well, when we switched to different media, I was really expecting for our commenter to say something about podcasts. Because like fictional podcasts where there isn't like a visual of the character's costume, like my first and my favorite, Welcome to Night Vale, we all pretty much agree more or less on like what Cecil looks like and what other people who are like never visually shown look like. based on how they sound. So it's like collective costume designing.
I think Cecil's a really funny one because you see a lot of like, I remember especially at the heyday of like fan art, that was very in contrast to things that were said in episode of like, I'm wearing my best furry pants, and some people are like, I see, he's a twink in a purple suit.
So they're almost doing verbal shorthand for the
Yeah.
costumes. But you have to know the tropes then. Anybody else?
Subscribe to my YouTube channel, it's Cinematire. I talk about fashion and I never shut up.
And on that, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful